The aging out process of Bud Crawford continues by Al Heyman and the PBC and Errol Spence by extension. How do I know this? Because the current trend follows the past trends. The past trends were Bud Crawford needs to cross the street. For 4.5 to 5 years, Bud Crawford needs to cross the street in order to get the Errol Spence fight or a fight between him and anyone in the PBC stable for that matter. So when Bud Crawford beats Sean Porter, knocks him out, and then becomes a promotional free agent and announces that he's willing to work with the PBC in order to make an Errol Spence fight, what does the PBC do next? They sign Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas for a unification fight, and then tell us that this unification fight needs to happen in order to make Spence versus Crawford even bigger. Not only a super fight, but a fight for undisputed. So what happens? Errol Spence knocks out Yordenis Ugas. And instead of going directly to the Terence Crawford fight, instead of immediately starting negotiations for a Bud Crawford fight, what do? They wait 4+ months. And by the way, this is verified by both Bud Crawford and Errol Spence publicly, that Bud Crawford did not get a rough draft. He got a rough draft for a contract over 4 months after the Yordenis Ugas fight. Over 4 months. Why would it take over 4 months to get this guy a rough draft of a contract for a super fight? So what happens? Neither fighter, and both fighters have verified, neither fighter got guaranteed money in the supposed contract that's floating around out there. 65-35 split. Neither fighter gets guaranteed money. Errol Spence was advised by his advisor as the A side of a super fight to take a contract in which he gets no guaranteed money. So Bud Crawford, sniffing this out, decides to fight Evanesyan, gets $10 million guaranteed dollars that already hit the bank account before the fight even happens, to fight another top 10 welterweight, and he knocks out the top 10 welterweight in front of 15,000 plus in Omaha, Nebraska, while banking $10 million guaranteed dollars. But since the 8 weeks, it's been 8 weeks since Terence Crawford decided to go in a different direction and fight Evanesyan, and in those 8 weeks, Errol Spence still has no fight date or opponent lined up. So what does that tell us? If we read between the lines, if we read the trends, the past trends, when it comes to the PBC, Errol Spence, in dealing with Bud Crawford has always been the inconvenient truth at the welterweight division. The guy that Al Heyman has never wanted to feed his fighters to. So it makes perfect sense that they're dragging their feet in order to sign Errol Spence's and announce Errol Spence's next fight, which will likely be against Keith Thurman. Because what does it do? It further pushes back, it further advances the aging out Bud Crawford process that has been going on for 5 years. Al Heyman, PBC, and by extension, Errol Spence. Errol Spence and his team will come out and announce a fight date for February, possibly February, likely March. And they'll push out there, they'll advance this narrative that Bud Crawford needs to wait around for 3 months in order to see what happens with this fight and in order to further work on negotiations for a possible fight, a super fight between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford for later on in the year. So while Bud Crawford's waiting around for 3 months for something to happen, he has to assume that, one, Errol Spence will win the fight, and also assume that when he comes back to the table, that Al Heyman, Errol Spence, and the PBC team will work fairly with him. But this past trend tells us that he'll wait 3 months, and he'll possibly have to wait again for 4+ months in order to get a rough draft for a contract and hope that Showtime and the PBC has money in the budget to fund this possible super fight between Errol Spence and Bud Crawford. But in finality, don't expect much. Don't expect this super fight to happen. And don't buy the narrative, the smear campaign against Bud Crawford, that this is somehow his fault. It was in his right to take the tune-up fight with Avanesian. And by the way, Errol Spence is now free. He doesn't have a fight date. He doesn't have an opponent. Bud Crawford is also free. Why not go directly into negotiations once again right now on December 15, 2022? God bless.